Today's lesson is estimating length. The word estimate means that we're going to get a close enough answer to the real answer. If I say estimate the length of your desk, I'm not telling you to use a ruler, but I'm telling you to estimate. Now, what could you do? You could use any measuring unit you would wish. For example, to measure the desk, I would probably say I'm going to use the width of my arm to measure the width of my hand to measure the length of the desk. So I'm going to place my hand right next to my hand and keep on moving my hand down from one side to the other side and tell you this is the length of my desk. I'm going to do some examples over here to make it a little bit clear. Okay, I'm going to estimate to measure the length of this crayon box using the tip of my finger. So I'm going to place a line right there because that's where we're going to start. I'm going to put another line right there because that's the end of the tip of my finger. So I know I have a marking point where to move it on from. So I place my finger right there, right next to that line right there, and I'm going to be drawing another line. And again, I keep on moving on until I get to the end of the box. So that right there is roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is 6 finger tips long. So this crayon box is roughly 6 fingertip long. So on estimate, it is pretty much 6 fingertips long. Of course, if I tell you to use the same exact box and use your fingertip to measure the length of this box, we're going to have different numbers because we all have different sizes. And of course, yours is going to be a little bit smaller than mine, so you might end up with 7 or 8 fingertip long. Okay, another example, I'm going to use this paper clip and say estimate the length of this paper clip. Again, I choose to use my fingertip, so I'm going to place a mark right there. That's about 1, 2, and the end of it is about right there. So it is about 1, 2, 3. It is about 3 finger tips long. Again, the measuring unit that I used is fingertips. Now we need to use, for this lesson, we need to use mental math or some common sense in our mental, in guessing what unit or what measuring unit we should be using to measure different things that I ask you to measure. For example, if I tell you to measure the length of this book, okay, I'm not going to be using my fingertip. The reason being is because it would take much longer to start from one side to the other side to measure this book. Paper clip, again, I'm not saying I can't, I could, but it will take much longer time. So that's why I was saying we're going to use some common sense in picking our unit for measuring the length of different items. Again, this paper clip, sure, we could use it, but it might take us longer. So I think the best option would probably is to use this crayon because it'd be much quicker for us to measure from one side to the other side using this. Other examples I could say is measure the length of the door. Again, I'm not going to use my fingertip. I'm not going to be using the paper clip. I'm not going to be using this crayon, even though I can, but I won't. The reason being is it will take us a longer time to do so. But instead, I'm going to be using the length of this book to measure the length of the door. So some questions in this unit that I could be asking is, what would you use, or what unit would you use to measure the length of the board, the classroom board? Again, you could, you're going to be thinking about it. I could use my fingertip. Sure, I could use a crayon. Sure, I could use a glue stick or a crayon box. But it would take us much longer to do so, opposed to using, for example, a math book, because it is much longer and it will be a little bit quicker for us to do so. Now we're going to get back into real measuring units, opposed to saying paper clips or fingertips or crayon boxes or glue sticks, and use real measuring units. Last unit we converted from centimeters to millimeters, and we did the other way around. We went from millimeters to centimeters. This time we're going to be adding meters on to our measuring units. So to go from centimeters to meters, we know that a meter is bigger than a centimeter, so we know. So when we go from centimeters to meters, the number is going to get smaller. And if we're going from meters to centimeters, we know that the meter is a bigger unit than a centimeter. So to go from meters to centimeters, the number is going to get bigger. So 1 meter is actually equal to 100 centimeters. 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters, and I've got this measuring scale right here that I could use, or a little measuring tape. Again, so that's the we're going to ignore the inch side. We're only talking about centimeters. So this is the centimeter side, and it starts obviously right here from 0. And we take it all the way to 100 centimeters, right there. That's 1 meter long. So starting from 0 all the way to 100, that's 1 meter long. So if we're going from meters to centimeters, the number is getting bigger, so we must multiply by 100. And if we're going the other way around, if we're going from 100 centimeters to 1 meter, because that's a conversion, that means the number is getting smaller. That means we're dividing by 100. And I'll be giving some examples so that you know what I'm talking about. Let's say 250 centimeters. To go from 250 centimeters to meters, okay, so we said we're going from centimeters to meters. That means the number is going to get smaller. That means we must divide by 100. Okay, 250 divided by 100 equals 2.5. So 2.5 meters is equal to 250 centimeters. Now let's go the other way around and go from meters to centimeters. 6 meters is equal to how many centimeters? 6 meters equal to how many centimeters? So we're going from the smaller unit to a bigger unit because we're going from meters to centimeters. That means we must multiply by 100. 6 times 1, again, we're using skills that we've learned from units before. 6 times 1 equals 6, and we're going to bring over the 2 zeros that we have over here. So the answer is 600 centimeters. So the answer is 600 centimeters. Again, just to recap things that we did in this lesson, we talked about measuring or estimating the length of different things. So if I say estimate the length of a crayon box, I chose to use my fingertips and I measured the length of the crayon box. And then I said, let's measure the length of a paper clip. And again, I used my fingertip to do so. That's why I said 3 fingertip long. And then I will be asking you guys question about what would you be using to measure the length of a door? And you could, again, you can use your paper clip, you can use your fingertip, you can use a crayon box, but we're going to make it easy for us. So we're going to be saying that we're going to be using a bigger unit, which is most like a book that we have on hand, and say we're going to be using a book to measure the length of the door. Other questions that I will be asking, and that is why we talked about centimeters to meters, and in the previous lesson we talked about millimeters, is, for example, what would you use would you use meters, would you use millimeters, centimeters, or meters to measure the length of this book? Millimeters, it would be a big number. Meters is a big unit, so I think that we shouldn't be using that for this. So instead, I would say I would be using centimeters to measure this. Measure the tip of this pencil. So let's say measure the tip of this pencil. So from here to here, right before the yellow, measure the tip of this pencil. I'm going to be using, would you use centimeters, millimeters, or meters? Since it's something that's very small, we would be using millimeters. If I say let's measure the length of the wall that we have in our class, again, millimeters is way too small. Or what would you use to measure the length of the wall in this class? Millimeters is too small. Centimeters is too small. Meters is a good size unit that we could use because we talked about it earlier. Every 100 centimeters is equal to 1 meters. So I would be using meters to measure the length of the wall.